process. If we could pick 2 people on this panel, and if we could have one who's a leader in the ocean, the caucus in the ocean, and one leader on hunger, and have them on the same panel and have a dialogue about what's happening in Congress and what can we do in those 2 spaces, hunger and ocean, I think that would be an amazing panel. That's what we've managed to do today. We've managed to have 2 people who are not just lawmakers, but are leaders. Leaders in a space with long history and passion and vision to understand what's facing our planet, what do we need to do today in order to be prepared for tomorrow. Because let's face it, if we mess this up, it's our posterity that pays the price. We'll pay some price, but the people who aren't in the room are going to pay the larger price. So with that, probably a brief introduction, let me invite to the stage, if I can, our distinguished panelists.
The ocean and what you stand for and what it stands for is something that I've been with most of my life, although I was raised in California on a river, Sacramento River. Went to Alaska, the Yukon River. But along the way, I have visited the oceans of the West and the seas of the West. I got interested in this problem for the food aspect, feeding the world. As you know, Alaska is the largest fishing state in the Union. We manage it with the Magnuson Act, has done well. We have renewed the Magnuson Act on the House side. It's been installed in the Senate, so if you have any contact with the senators, would you please, I noticed Norm Dick's in the room, and by the way, Norm was a dear friend of mine. We lost him, and I say he did it voluntarily. Of course, I always have to say that why do the good ones leave and the sons of bitches stay behind? And I've been in this business 45 years, so what's that make me? The longest serving Republican, second longest serving Democrat. I have had 9 presidents, and 1,555 members of Congress have served with me. That's a lot of people, doesn't mean anything. And in fact, my interest has been the oceans and wildlife and management of. And I think we have to understand the management. Unfortunately, even in this room, you have differences of opinion. I would suggest respectfully there's enough strength in this room and intelligence in this room if we all got together and quit arguing, nitpicking, and wanting your way 100%. Think what we could do with the ocean. Think what we can think about man's activity, which will occur regardless of what we do. Let's do it collectively together. And where man is doing harm, let's help him take and stop doing the harm. Let's not just say no. I'm speaking primarily to fishing. In my state, it's probably the largest economic boost to the state. More than that, it feeds an awful lot of people. How do we keep that? We certainly don't keep it by growing salmon in nets, in pens. It's one of my biggest fights. Our biggest selling point in Alaska for our fishes are wild. Wild fish instead of raised fish. And some people say we can feed more people if we raise it. Maybe, maybe not. You just saw one of the Tyson's chicken farms lost 137,000 chickens if they got sick. That same thing can happen to fish. So my interest is to make sure that man's recognized for his role and how we not only preserve it, but keep it and conserve it and protect it, but provide for it. That's our biggest challenge as far as the Congress goes. I would suggest another thing. I was listening to the gentleman ask the question back here about pollutants. We have talked about that for a long time. Where do we address it? For sure. We can identify it now. We know where most of the large deposits of, I call it refuge, is located in the seas. Why hasn't somebody, maybe we ought to take all our ocean-related transportation companies, and maybe we ought to think about that and set up a consortium just not to pay for the docks and the harbors, but pay and help create a ship or ships that can go to the spot where that refuge is lying and solve it right there by collecting it and using the plastic for energy to run the ship and the wood to run the ship and salvaging the metal that's there floating. Why don't we clean the ocean up? We have not done that as long as man has been on Earth. But it's there and it's growing every day. Some areas as large as 30 miles long and 20 miles wide, floating trash. But I can't find anybody really interested because they don't see it. What man doesn't see, they don't really do anything about. So I'm suggesting an idea that let's clean our oceans. Let's study what we possibly can do because of what has been deposited in the ocean. Let's make sure our ocean is like the prairie of that person that first saw it. My God, it's big. It's not chartered. We really don't know, but we're trying to go to California from Kansas. And they did. And they caused some problems. So I'm asking this consortium to really sort of think out of the box, all hold hands. Because that's what we have to do in Congress. That's pretty hard to do in Congress today, I'll tell you that right now. Everybody looks at me and says, I'm a Republican. I'm talking like a liberal. I'm talking about preserving, protecting, and providing for an asset to this nation. It's our oceans. For food, which is crucial as our population grows. For transportation, which is crucial as we do trade. For frankly security, it's there. And we have relatively neglected it. I know all of you in this room are very interested. You're working together. You really think you've got it together, and you probably do collectively, but not all together, constructively. And the average person in the street, and that's our biggest challenge, doesn't really care. Really doesn't give a damn. Yet that's what provides them with the security, the food, the minerals. I can go on down the line. And by the way, I want to congratulate David on Eastman and what they're doing. I believe there's a great opportunity there. If we just get more people understanding what you're trying to do. I never thought about some of the things you were just mentioning about lightening the weight of the car. And my idea was just make it out of aluminum like Ford did, which they did. But we have other opportunities in this nation how we can provide and produce and keep science ahead of us. But let's take care of the one thing that provides all to us, and that's the ocean. Water, the food, and the security, and the future all lies in the ocean. My role as a congressman is to make sure I connect with people, listen to people, and try to solve some of these problems together. That's my role as the only congressman from Alaska. I got just as many votes as everybody else. I got more water than anybody else. I can tell you that right now. I have more transportation corridors than anybody else. And I do believe Alaska can solve, with your help, some of those issues I just mentioned. Food security, science, and keep our oceans clean. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks, David, and thank you for inviting me here today. I want to thank the Consortium for Ocean Leadership for hosting this, and it's great to be here with my former colleague, Norm Diggs. We miss you. I know you don't miss us as much, but we miss you. And I'm honored to be on the same platform as Don Young, who I think is an incredible member of Congress, who I wish more people on both sides of the aisle had his attitude about getting things done, results-oriented, and making things happen and making a difference rather than always polar opposites on everything. I've watched him in action, and I've known I don't always agree with him on everything, but I know when I don't agree with him to shut up because I will lose. I've seen him take apart people who are on the other side, and I don't want to ever be there. As some of you know, I co-chair the House Hunger Caucus in the House of Representatives. It's a bipartisan group of 82 members of the House. Congresswoman Lynn Jenkins, a Republican from Kansas, is the other co-chair. And it's a caucus designed to talk about, to bring awareness about hunger in this country, and to talk about food insecurity and about solutions and about things that we can work on together. I also serve as the ranking member on the Nutrition Subcommittee on the House Agriculture Committee. And this issue of hunger has become a passion of mine. I every day I see people, whether here in Washington, D.C. or in Massachusetts or wherever I travel, who are hungry. Hunger is a problem in the United States, not just around the world, but here in the United States. We're the richest country in the history of the world, and yet there are 42 million Americans who are food insecure or are hungry. And I think that is shameful. And I tell people all the time that hunger is a political condition. I mean, we know what to do, we have the resources, what we don't have is the political will, and that needs to change. And worldwide, about 795 million people are undernourished. And so while we have, programs here in the United States and around the world to try to deal with this problem of hunger, it is not enough. And we need to have some urgency about figuring out ways to deal better with this problem. As we know that there's an inextricable link between our climate and the oceans. A properly functioning ocean system is critical to food production. I think while in Washington this may be a controversial subject, but I think to people who study science it isn't. The Earth is undeniably getting warmer. 2014, 2015, and 2016 each broke the previous year's record for the warmest year ever documented. And with this increase in global temperature, we see an increase in ocean evaporation and atmospheric temperatures. Oceans are losing more water than ever before, and the water vapor stays in the atmosphere longer. And because of this, we're seeing increases in extreme weather, both floods and droughts. Farmers across the country are facing dramatic changes. They are trying to work to adapt to this crazy weather pattern, and they're also dealing with threats from pests and experiencing new challenges with soil. In my district alone in Massachusetts, I do farm tours every year, and we have been experiencing late frosts and droughts, and farmers have been devastated. And I think I've noticed in the last 2 years that this issue of climate change is one of the first things that come out of the farmers' mouths when I ask them, what are your challenges here? There are lots of challenges, but this is now part of it because they know that they can't depend on the weather like they used to, and it's hurting their livelihoods. Undoubtedly, all of this is going to have an impact on our food supply. And agriculture is one of the industries most forcefully tied to changes in weather. So it is one of the most vulnerable. We need to kind of keep that in mind as we talk about this subject. Globally, climate change is the single greatest threat to our coral reef ecosystem. Increased ocean temperatures, ocean acidification, pollution, and illegal fishing are destroying our coral reef ecosystem. And as you all know, without these reefs, coastal communities are far more vulnerable to stronger and more frequent storms that are a result of climate change. So we are in a situation where we're going to have to, at some point, come together and, whether we want to call it climate change or whatever, understand that some of this is within our control, and some of the solutions here have to be man-made solutions. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that 12% of the world's population depends on fisheries for their livelihoods. They depend upon healthy coral reefs around the world. And it takes tens of thousands of years for corals to regenerate. And so we need to protect these delicate ecosystems before it's too late. And everybody here can help. It is critical that we each work to reduce our carbon footprint, which have an effect on the food security and storm vulnerability of the people all over this planet. And let me just say one other final thing here. And another issue that I think we ought to be concerned with and figure out how we can deal with, and that is the issue of food waste. In my role in the Agriculture Committee, I've been involved with efforts to address the issue of how do we feed not only people here in the United States, but all around the world. And this issue of food waste is now kind of reaching a level of prominence. In this country, about 40% of the food we produce is never eaten. And estimates suggest that this food waste translates into about 387 billion calories of food that goes unconsumed each year. And I think we all can agree that this is a problem worth addressing, given the fact that we have millions and millions of people on this planet who are going hungry. Wasted seafood is a big part of the food waste picture. especially on the consumer end of the chain. A study by Johns Hopkins estimates that 40 to 47% of the edible seafood supply goes uneaten. If it were eaten instead of lost, that seafood could provide the total yearly nutritional target of protein for 10 million people. So I'm working with my colleagues on the Agriculture Committee to address food waste through strengthening educational campaigns, changing date labeling practices, updating our food donation laws, and more. And I think we need to establish a coordinating office at USDA to address food waste throughout the supply chain because it is such a huge issue. And we don't have the infrastructure in place here in this country, let alone around the world, to be able to deal with it. There are lots of great organizations, both private and government, working to address food waste, so I think we need to strengthen the coordination amongst these groups. Bycatch is also a big issue as we explore food waste issues. According to the National Marine Fisheries Service, almost 1/5 of all fish caught in U.S. waters is bycatch. And we also need to be looking at more targeted fishing practices and updates to the equipment that we use to fish. And I will finally say, kind of echoing back to what Don Young said, I mean, I have long been in love and fascinated with oceans. I grew up in Massachusetts. We spent all of our summers on Cape Cod. And we still go to the same beach that we always went to from the time I was born. And I still love it. But what I have noticed is that at that same beach when I was a kid, I used to catch bluefish. I no longer can catch bluefish there. When I was a kid, the beach used to be filled with conch shells, no longer anymore. Changing temperatures in water, a whole bunch of other, man-made, activities that have encroached upon the life within that ocean that I grew up on, has had an impact. We need to be better stewards of the ocean, and I think this should not be a partisan issue. And if we had more people like Don Young, it wouldn't be. He'd be reaching across the aisle trying to find ways to make things happen, or making sure that we couldn't say no to whatever offer he put on the table. But this is an important gathering here today, and I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
What I pick up as a thread around kind of the difference between how the world works and what perhaps the electorate understands, whether it's the importance of the ocean on food security and safety, or just the general understanding around climate, right? Jim, you talked about climate change. We know the ocean has absorbed from 1865 to 1997 about 150 zetajoules. It's done that since 1997 to now, so ocean warming. So this is a group that's uniquely qualified to message and educate better. What advice would you give us on how to educate and message better around the importance of the ocean? I mean, you're out in the electorate all the time.
Yeah, well, I've come to the conclusion that people look at life through their kitchen window. So when we get into these kind of abstract discussions, even when we talk about climate change, sometimes we lose people. I think we need to tie it back to how it impacts them and their everyday lives. How it impacts everything from the price of food to the lack of availability of certain foods, the health consequences, as well as, putting that into the context of the bigger discussion on issues like climate change. Oceans, I think you were talking, David, in the beginning, impact everybody, whether you're on the coast or whether you're right in the middle of the heartland of this country. I don't think a lot of people actually appreciate that. And sometimes they need to be reminded. And so I think we need to have a message that is tailored more toward, just kind of everyday people, and having them kind of understand that there is a connection between some of these things that we're concerned about and their everyday life. And I think the same for members of Congress as well. And I would add one other thing, that when people do the wrong thing, and they are supporting things that undercut, I think, the goals of everybody in this room, there needs to be a consequence. And I think that that's also important as part of how you approach things.
I would echo the fact that the ignorance of people about the ocean is very prevalent. Some of that's your fault. You talk amongst yourselves. You don't go outside. Little education on the ocean. And then you have the adversarial positions within those that are participating in the ocean. We have groups in this room that don't like fishing. That's bad because the fishermen, they can oppose you. We have groups that don't like the chemical industry. You surprised you. Okay.
Shocker.
And I'm saying that's where we miss the boat. If we really believe in the ocean and the providing that it will do for the population of the world, then we ought to join hands and say, okay, I don't get my way all the time 100%, but let's work together to clean it up, stop demands, and I think that may be minor to some extent, of how the ocean is going to be managed, not preserved. When I see an administration, anybody else set aside a huge thousands and thousands, millions of acres with no science and effect upon other people without any consultation, that's not good. Because it creates an adversarial role amongst those that who work with the ocean. Let's remember, the ocean is the greatest transportation corridor system in the world. Moves more tons than all the railroads put together in the world. So we have to work together and make sure that still goes, and don't say don't have any transportation system. So I don't want everybody to say no to this because it doesn't fit your realm. That will help us explain it to the public of why it's important. Otherwise, the public's going to ignore it. And I challenge you right now, just do me a favor. When you leave this room today, go 2 blocks from here and ask the first person you meet on the street, what do you think of the oceans? You know what most of them will say? It's okay if it's warm enough to go swimming. I mean, there's a lack of knowledge. And I've charged other industries, including yours, the oil industry, everybody else. You don't educate the public. And when you don't do that, those that promote, I call antagonism, can win the battle because they're dealing with the ignorant. That's what happened.
So that's a great lead in my next question. One of the things that Eastman's tried to do is we have an educational initiative. It's an ocean processes course at a high school in our backyard, where if you take advanced chemistry, physics, biology, and the list, all the APs, you get to qualify for an ocean processes course. You can imagine the physics and chemistry and biology of a wave. And what we found was it's extraordinarily hard to get a school system to adopt a new class. They're so busy teaching towards a test and so worried about demonstrating proficiency, we had to use a lot of resources to get it across the goal line and demonstrate, you know what? What about you pull people into a class instead of push them? They had a waiting list of 47 students and a waiting list next year. So, I promise there's a question there. What can we do to change that conversation earlier in K through 12? Because I think if you don't get them before then, it's just a lot harder. And this is, I know, thinking a bit outside the box. Do you have any insight you might give us to help push that?
Well, we set forth a good step of eliminating teaching for the test. I was a public school teacher for 11 years, and I taught school not because of the test. I taught the brain and how to get the brain working. Imagination, solutions, challenges, and I think we're getting back to that. You know, I'm great when I believe in reading, writing, and arithmetic, you bet. But if you don't train the brain on other things and make that brain be curious, you're going to lose this battle. I mean, it just doesn't work. And you know, I still think you're on the right track with that.
Yeah, look, I mean, this is more kind of a local issue. I mean, I don't think you could do a federal mandate to kind of address what you're talking about here today, but I have 2 sisters that are school teachers, and they're big believers in experiential learning. I mean, they teach in the inner city in Worcester. I mean, there are kids who don't know, you know, have never seen an eggplant, don't know how potatoes are grown, don't know how carrots are grown, and so they bring them to farms so they can see that. The same thing with oceans. We're in central Massachusetts. You know, it's only a couple of hours away from Cape Cod, but some of them never venture outside the city. They read about oceans. They don't know anything. They don't know firsthand what it's like to actually stand on the shore. And so to the extent that collaborations and partnerships can be developed at a local level, hopefully with creative superintendents and principals and teachers, I think that is wonderful, because I mean, you really do want to capture imaginations at an early age, and you want people to go into some of the fields that you're involved in. You want people to think outside of their little box that they're in. And so I think, and I think there's a greater appreciation for being good to the ocean if you actually can see the ocean. There's a greater appreciation for what you eat in terms of seafood if you know where the seafood comes from. And so, so I think it's those kinds of partnerships I think are incredible, and certainly on local levels, I think all of us would be willing to help be supportive.
That's before, the last week or two, we've read in the paper that NOAA and NASA and Sea Grant, EPA, may be facing some funding. So I've got to ask the question, because if I don't, someone here will. I know it's easier for it to come from me. What's your outlook on funding? And if it's positive, that's great. And if it's negative, what could we do differently to help stem that tide?
If I could, this is one of the hardest arguments I had with 9 presidents, 45 budgets. Now keep that in mind. The president doesn't write the budget, guys. We write the budget. The United States Congress writes the budget. But boy, you talk about flit hitting the fan when the president comes down with the budget, whether you're right, left, or in between. Oh, the president and the media follows up on it, and they create this hysteria. What I'm suggesting for you is to work with the appropriators and the Congress and say, this is important. Now, frankly, I get mad at NIPS sometimes, and I would like to see them cut sometimes. I'll be right up front with you. Because I think they make stupid mistakes, because they'll spend a whole lot of money on looking at trout and the Oregon River instead of looking at the whitefish problem offshore. Now, that caused a bad problem. You don't understand what I mean. I think there are more important things to do than looking at trout. Trout Unlimited doesn't like that. But I keep saying, we as a nation have forgotten the 3 branches of government, and only the Congress are raised to spend money, not the president. And yet I listen to the media every night, and when I get done throwing up, the president, what he's doing, the bobbleheads are too good. The president want to do everything. Now he knows, my good seatmate here, and I know we are the ones that write. And we may have a different opinion where we spend the money, but it's up to us to spend the money. And if I can spend money on things that are going to help the future and provide the science, I'm going to support that. That's what I'm, and if more people think about that instead of whether you're a D or you are or whatever, we'd be a lot better off. So remember that. The president does not write the budget.
Yeah, and I would feel a lot more hopeful if Don Young were the Speaker of the House. So, I'm nervous. I really am, and there's a, and look, budgets are about choices, right? I mean, where our priorities are, and I worry that there's this kind of obsession with national security to the point where I'm not sure that we're necessarily making the smartest investments in national security. There is waste at the Pentagon. So before we start, calling for a huge increase in military spending, maybe we ought to make sure that everything is being spent the way we want to. And part of the problem with, defense spending too is that they become jobs programs. We may be building things that no longer have any practical use, but we continue to do it anyway. And I think we ought to have a bigger, we ought to have a larger definition of national security that includes things like the purity of our environment and the cleanliness of our water and the integrity of our oceans and ending hunger and all those other things, and so and those things tend to take a back seat. And look, I want a defense second to none. We have challenges like we've never faced before, and they're constantly changing. But, I always remind people, my constituents lose sleep at night, not wondering whether Osama bin Laden's brother's going to knock on their front door. They're worried about, are they going to have a job tomorrow? Can they afford to send their kid to college? Or they live next to a contaminated site that they're trying to figure out whether there's money to actually clean it up. So look, so I think one of the in the area of advice, I say this to everybody who comes in, like when doctors say they want bigger reimbursement, they say, well, help us find the offset. Well, no, we don't do that. Well, you have to help us do that. So if we're advocating for more here and we have a limited amount of money, you have to be willing to say, and we think that this is a place where you might get it from. And because if not, we can cut some of these programs that you just talked about, and there won't be a consequence. I do a lot of work on hunger, and I get really mad when a year ago on the Farm Bill there was a vote that passed the House to cut SNAP, which is known as food stamps, by $40 billion. Everybody, all these advocates came to me and said, "Oh, I can't believe it," but nobody heard anything from anybody in their districts after the House voted to do that. So that part of this is helping get behind the bigger picture, and also saying that if you go down this road of cutting programs that are really important, that we're gonna be an echo chamber to help people in your community know that you did this.
I bring up one point that bothers me when proposed spending of dollars in military defense. One of the areas where the administration is proposing, remember we write the budget, but they're proposing cutting the Coast Guard, cutting NOAA, cutting NIPS, cutting, which is part of NOAA, and a few other things without any consultation. And then how are they going to pay? They can pay for the wall, by the way, the wall. And I will honestly, I voted against the wall not because I'm a humanitarian. It won't work. And that's that simple. I'm not going to spend 18, 20, $100 billion to build something that's not going to work. And now, here's what I make a suggestion, and you're all an intellectual group, you can help me sell this. I want to sell wall bonds. Think about this a moment. It's a playoff of war bond. Yes, but we'll put them out. I'll give them 2 1/3, maybe 2.5 interest. That's what we did in World War II. We financed the war. But then the decision will be up to you, the American people, whether you want to build a wall or not. That won't work. That's up to you, because you get a return on your money. But why cut those programs that see, I'm a big Coast Guard guy, I always have been, and I used to get mad at them because I had my own boat, say if we give me a bad time or ships. But we worked it out. But we got to look at these things as we go through this and say, okay, this makes no sense. If you want to build a wall, then sell wall bonds. It happens, guys. You got it right here. I've been trying to talk this up, and everybody disagrees with me.
That's awesome. That's hard to top right there. That's excellent. It seems to me that things that are proposed to be cut, that we don't even know the benefits of them and won't until they're gone. And then it'll be a bit late. So if somehow we could change the dialogue from what it is to something around, and we had someone who made a comment earlier, is there a model that we can run, or is there forecasts that we can run? If you could reduce some of what we see and frame it as reducing uncertainty, through better science and better analysis, reduce uncertainty, because then you're starting to talk in economic language, because nobody likes risk so much. They like certainty, right? But we're still stuck with how do we get that across to the electorate before it's too late. So the question embedded in that is, it's kind of a refinement of the earlier one. Is that a viable solution, do you think? If we could frame it as, imagine the economic benefit, the benefit to security, which port is, because of sea level rise, will become unusable, and what time scale will become unusable? Do you think there's any legs to an uncertainty reframe?
Well, let me answer the question this way. I think I think you need to think of yourself as politicians, whereas you have to go out and sell this to constituents. And because I don't think selling it to us in and of itself is enough. People need to know, the consequences of doing nothing, the consequences of not funding science, the consequences of making bad decisions and having bad priorities. And I really do. I mean, I think that it's really selling this message at the local level. We're also focused on the national level. And look, like I said, I have great admiration for Don Young. I wish there were more people on both sides of the aisle who were like him. But the problem is this is a pretty polarized place right now, and it's hard to have a discussion here in Washington for anything more than like for 2 hours at a time, and especially with the new president. I mean, there's like 9,000 things happening every day between tweets and executive orders. I mean, it's like you just can't, we're about to talk about healthcare reform. I don't know whether this will be the lead news 2 days from now because something else will happen. So I think part of it has to be, you got to understand this system right here. You got to work the Congress people, but you also have to I think take this locally. I mean, go to the same places we go to. I mean, the Rotary clubs and the schools and the and editorial boards, and sit and explain what's at stake, because then you build up support locally, which is pressure on us, which quite frankly I think at this point is the most effective way to influence what happens here in Congress. And I just say, one other thing, going back to what Congressman Young said at the very beginning, we all have, I may agree with him on a couple of things, I may disagree with him on a few other things, but I have this philosophy: you don't have to agree on everything to agree on something, right? So all of us here, there's something we agree on, right? We ought to get behind that something and move it. It doesn't always, everything doesn't have to be this big omnibus, 1,000 different things. I mean, everything we can agree on, we ought to agree on and move it. Because I think that's probably, the only way we're going to be assured that anything is going to get done. So not everything has to be a gigantic, all-encompassing bill to cover everything. Let's focus on those areas of agreement and just move them. Even if they're small steps, a bunch of small steps add up to a lot.
Flour, and they had surplus chocolate and surplus, it's all surplus stuff, nobody's using it. So every day I'd cook biscuits, I had honey, and I had hot chocolate. My attendance roll never dropped below 100%. So I know it works. But what happened is the lack of education of how to prepare and serve food. We have Michelle Obama, bless her heart, and healthy lunches for kids. Okay, it's healthy on paper. It's not healthy for the kid. When I go into a classroom and they announce lunch, and it's 9 bags of lunch from individuals' homes, 21 kids get up and go out and get their lunch and come back with a tray, and it is a salmon patty, microwaved. A salmon patty, it looks like something you do walking along the trail and you step in and you're not going to have it. Beans were microwaved. And I watched these kids ate the roll, drank the milk, threw everything else away because it was prepared correctly. On paper, we reached that standard, but in reality, they weren't getting the nutrition they should be getting. And I've gone round and around school districts on this. And I've got some school districts now reviving, still staying into the federal standards, they lose their money. Standards are well, if they don't meet the goal, they're no good. So, waste, education is great. Truthfully, the industry itself has made great strides in keeping from the bycatch, which was really high. It's going down. Now, it's not as slow as we should have it. That's a waste too. There's no doubt about that. But food preparation, education, and by the way, we have now the largest obesity problem we've ever had in history. It's the biggest killer because people are eating badly. And by the way, if I have to say one more thing, don't eat anything that has fat in it. That's not true. It's the carbohydrates that gives you the fat. And we have to rechange. That came out of the government. They predicted and said this is what you have to eat. The government was wrong. Now they're beginning to come around a little bit. There's a better way to lose weight and maintain your strength by eating a different diet. We have to educate. Otherwise, we're going to eat, you know, don't get me started on that stuff.
So I agree with you. I think it's all of the above in terms of answering your question. Look, I think, you know, we want nutritional meals for our kids in schools, and preparation is a big part of it. But, you know, I've been to schools where kids are throwing apples away, and I ask them, don't you like apples? They say, we do. Well, why are you throwing them away? Because by the time we get through the line, we have like 10 minutes to eat, and I can breathe down my sandwich, but I can't eat. I don't have time to eat my apple. And then all of us, I mean, we are part of the problem here. I mean, we're so picky when we go shopping. So we buy apples. It has to look like the apple in Snow White, right? If there's a bump on the apple, we don't buy it. So therefore, you know, farmers don't provide that apple to the supermarket, you know, because you're not going to buy it. These Best Buy dates are crazy. They're different from state to state. They don't mean anything. But people think, my mother included, that if it says Best Buy this date, then the next day you got to throw the milk away. No, you smell it. If it smells sour, you throw it away. You know, eggs. The average shelf life of an egg at a supermarket is maybe 15 to 25 days in some supermarkets. An egg could last refrigerated, you know, for dozens of days more. But you know, we need a whole reassessment of kind of how we approach food here, because, you know, again, 40% of what we produce is thrown away, and it's perfectly good to eat. And we have a hunger problem in this country, and it's, you know, it's not just what's grown on a farm, it's also what's caught in the sea. So we need to provide the science to give people comfort that they can buy something beyond the Best Buy date. We need to educate people about that. And I agree with Danya. We also need to know how to cook, because one of the things is that if you want to have a healthy diet, you know, we have a generation now that believes that cooking is you buy something pre-made and you put it in the microwave and you nuke it for 2 minutes and that's your meal. No, you know, the way we prepare food here is unhealthy, and we need to get back to understanding how you prepare meals and how you cook.
I think this gets the vote for the liveliest, most engaging panel. Thank you so much, Congressman Young, Congressman McGovern.